to sit around at the end of the day with those guys and go, man, like you guys did all this cool stuff. And I had one of the special operations guys say, hey, look, man, you did your piece, I did my piece. Like that's how it works. Like it's not that big a deal. And I tell that story to really kind of harp on your point about like whatever your story is, like your story's good enough.
So, yeah, before we start, I do want to go ahead and make a shout out to one of our affiliates and someone we partnered with this year, new for 2025, and that is our homies over at EOTech. That's right. I'm holding the new 3x9 Voodoo, small footprint, got the E-Flex on top. And if you guys use Whiskey 10 at checkout on their website, it'll save you 10%. Anything on the site.
Yo, I am so excited. We've got our friend, an author, an editor, a veteran, a huge resume out here in the Second Amendment industry. So I'm really proud to introduce Mr. Tom Marshall. Welcome to Whiskey and Windage, my friend.
Thank you guys so much for having me on.
So to get started with our show, we always ask AI to give us a rundown of who you are. That way we're fully prepared. And sometimes we're not prepared at all. So this time I asked, who is Tom Marshall, author of Close and Destroy? This is what it says. Tom is an author known for his work on controversial issues surrounding firearm regulations and governmental oversight. He is an author of Close and Destroy, a book that critically examines policies and practices that impact gun rights and law enforcement. In his work, you challenge conventional narratives. Let's see here. Your analysis draws on historical context. Let's see. Let's go down here because all this stuff is like, if this is true, this is so new to me. Yeah, this basically goes into saying that you are 100% on the Second Amendment and fighting for gun rights and all that. How does that actually sound?
I mean, your interpretation in terms of being 100% on the Second Amendment, that part's true. Yeah, great. Read me the first part again. There was
I didn't catch like that in your book. So you're known for your work on controversial issues surrounding firearms regulations and government oversight.
Okay, who is it controversial to?
So that's question one.
Yeah. So then, I haven't got this yet, so I got to keep reading, and we'll go ahead and do plug one. Tom Marshall, Close and Destroy. If you haven't got it, go get it. It's on Amazon. It's in bookstores. It's online in bookstores. Go support the man. But it says, you're, as an author of Close and Destroy, a book that critically examines policies and practices that impact gun rights and law enforcement.
Yeah, that's not true at all.
I didn't catch that. No. I didn't catch that yet. No. Maybe that's at the end?
Yeah, no, there's no plot twist coming if you're like halfway through that delves into law enforcement and firearms policy. No, I'm going to try and give AI as much credit as possible, which is probably my first mistake. But I would have to imagine that some of that is influenced from my writing credits before Close and Destroy, which is all in, firearms and shooting industry magazines.
Yep.
I started as a freelance writer for Guns and Ammo back in 2012. Did a couple articles for them. And then started branching out. I wrote for World of Firepower. I wrote for SWAT magazine, a couple of blogs, Recoil magazine, some tactical training magazine. I know I'm going to miss one or two, and unfortunately, a lot of these publications are defunct now within the last 5 to 7 years. But yeah, I had the opportunity to write for a handful of good gun industry, whatever, tactical industry, firearms, shooting sports, whatever you want to call it, type publications. Right. So in 2017, I shifted from being a freelance writer to being a full-time staff editor at Recoil magazine. I started out there. I was there for about 7 years total. I started as senior editor of Recoil magazine. After a couple of years, I wound up as editor-in-chief of Off Grid magazine, which is like a sister publication to Recoil, as you can imagine, focused a little more on survival, prepared citizen type stuff. And then I spent my last couple of years, my last year to 18 months there, basically served as the operations manager for the parent publisher. So if you guys have ever heard of Blade Show or CanCon
Yep.
or Blade Magazine, Gun
Oh,
Digest,
yeah.
the Recoil titles, Concealment, Carnivore, I was very fortunate in that last role to kind of touch a little bit of all of that stuff. So maybe that's the controversial gun rights, gun policy stuff. But there's more to it than that, right? So I spent a couple of years active duty. I'm actually a graduate of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, which most of you probably aren't familiar with, but it is a federal service academy. It's like West Point or Air Force Academy or Coast Guard Academy, whatever. You do need a congressional nomination to get in, and they make you go through jump through all these hoops. But it is a federal service academy. So I went in the Merchant Marine Academy. I spent a year at sea as a cadet or a midshipman.
Oh wow!
Got to sail all around the world on tankers and cargo ships and things like that. Took all of that seafaring maritime knowledge and then graduated and took my commission in the Army instead. So
He was like, "Look, I've been on a
like,
boat
yeah,
before, y'all.
I just learned exactly what I don't want to do.
yeah. So I like to tell people I'm bilingual because I speak Army and Navy. So it doesn't matter if you call it a latrine or a head. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'll let the military figure it out, but that means he is smart and dangerous.
And then in high school, I was a cadet in the Civil Air Patrol. So the back of my closet looks like the dry cleaners for the Joint Chiefs of Staff because I've got Air Force blues and Navy whites and Army blues. Yeah.
So, Tom, it was talking about Close and Destroy being about a law enforcement and Second Amendment rights, but
Nowhere close.
No,
Yeah, not even close.
It's a work of fiction, but it is a real world military and contractor culture. So what inspired you to write about it? How did your verse come to I'm going to write a book and this is what it's going to be about?
Yeah, well, like you said, it is. I mentioned the military thing. I spent 4 years as a cavalry officer, which some would argue is 2 strikes. I was a cav guy and I was an officer, but that's a story for another time. But I got out of that. I left service active duty as a captain and wound up back down range. Well, let me back up. My first job after getting out of the Army was also technically a contract job. I was the security manager at a federally contracted halfway house. So we held upstanding citizens that were on their way out of the Federal Bureau of Prison Systems, but not quite ready for prime time in their own right. So I spent about 18 months doing that job. Like I said, I was security manager there. I had a small guard staff and some surveillance technicians and things like that.
Did they keep you
busy? Thankfully, not very.
Good.
I went into that job. Yeah, I went into that job really expecting it to be a bit of a gladiator ring. Yeah, and thankfully that's actually not that's not how that job turned out, which I'm thankful for.
Everybody was minding their P's and Q's then.
Yeah, I think a lot of those guys are on their best behavior because again, for some guys, the halfway house is like a trial period. Right? Like, we're not ready to let you all the way out yet, so we're going to put you in this, like, semi-controlled environment that's not technically an institution, and let's see how you do.
Yeah.
So, I think for some of them, that's the best deal that they were going to get. So, like I said, fortunately, like you said, a lot of those guys did mind their P's and Q's. But I did that job for about 18 months, and then I was right back down range, actually, as a federal government contractor, doing, like force protection, security type stuff, supporting the intelligence community, which was really cool. It was really cool to sort of like watch that mission go on, even sort of from a couple layers back on the perimeter. But it was cool. So I did that for 4 years. I think if I tally it up, if I actually count it by trips over there, I think I have 12 or 13. I think it's 13 deployments to Afghanistan. Over a period of about
Thank you for your
4
service
years and
on
some
that.
change.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for your service on that. That's crazy.
So it was a really cool program to be a part of. And I left that job, by the way, to take that full-time gig with Recoil. In between those deployments was when I was doing a lot of my freelance writing for some of those other magazines I talked about in the beginning. And then, I got a little burned out on the revolving door program. My son was getting older, and obviously, you want to be there more and things like that. So, like I said, I left the contracting world, the overseas contracting world, and went into the writing thing full time. I've been writing fiction since, I think my mom would probably tell you the summer between kindergarten and first grade. I think I wrote a screenplay or something like that, right? And
Cool.
so this was always something I was doing on the side. And it really was. I wasn't published anywhere. I wasn't submitting to forums or boards or anything like that. It was just to kill a lot of that downtime on some of those deployments. Getting published, and by the way, through that time, I always kind of hit a wall at a certain word count. I never really had I wasn't cranking out full length novel manuscripts and sitting on them. It was pieces here, pieces there, kind of all in a common universe that wound up feeding the universe that now is Close and Destroy. But I just couldn't sit down and keep. I just couldn't stay on one plot long enough, and I kind of was plagued by that for a few years. And then finally, I think it would have been, 2021. I really, world events were what they were. We were post-COVID.
Yeah.
We were post-collapse of Afghanistan. And, that really, I don't know, it just threw a lot of fuel on the fire. And it was a lot of nights and weekends, a lot of hours in my local cigar shop with my earbuds in, clacking away on the laptop. And it probably took me, again, nights and weekends, took me about a year and a half. I want to say about 18 months to get the manuscript done. And yeah, and so I actually had a full, commercially viable length manuscript to go with.
So I kind of want to go in and ask, it's a two-part question. So I was going to ask you how much have you drawn on your own experiences or those people around you that served with you or those that you knew to help cultivate this book, but also just for my personal, because I'm interested, what year you say about 13 deployments, 12 or 13 more or less. What were your active duty years during the deployment? I'm just trying to get a timeline of where you what was going on in the world.
Yeah, I'll answer that first. So active duty, when I was actually in the Army, that was 2007 to 2011.
Okay.
So I did do a year in Iraq. We actually were. I mean, it's an honor that kind of doesn't really mean anything, but we were technically the last combat brigade to leave Operation Iraqi Freedom. And there was this blip on CNN, and they had this multi-mile long convoy of armored vehicles driving over the border from Iraq into Kuwait. So I was part of that convoy out. So that was my one deployment on the active duty side. And then years in Afghanistan was December of 2012 to December of 2016. So basically 4 years exactly, within a couple weeks.
And that was a hot time.
Fortunately, I didn't see anything too heinous, which kind of brings me to the first part of your question in terms of basing stuff off of things that happen to me or happen to people I know. I'm going to say this, all the exciting parts of the book, none of that shit happened to me. So, I didn't have any, I wasn't in any heinous 12-hour gunfights or anything like that. But obviously having lived and worked in that world for years, I mean, it absolutely, it draws from, people I knew. I'm not going to say that characters were directly based off individuals, but you sort of composite that stuff from bits and pieces of people's histories and personalities and stories they tell around the fire pit and all that stuff. So yeah, I mean, that was part of my goal, was to really sort of capture that authentic experience.
I think it is authentic in that too, because I mean, maybe it's not, it's obviously not based on experiences that you have, but it is based on knowledge that you have on how that type of operation might function, or at least be able to present it in a way that's believable as a story.
Yeah, and I like it.
Yeah.
I like it too. Like I said, for full disclosure, I'm not a huge avid reader,
Same.
unless it has pictures, like I said earlier. But when I meet someone who actually wrote something, I actually want to go in and look at it, and I actually want to watch it or excuse me, I want to read it just to first off be respectful and support their business. That's one thing. But two, it just gives me more insight into who you are, whether you would have came on the show or not. It was like, man, I met a guy who took time out of his day or days to write something that, put together. I've never done that. I don't know how that process is, but you said, many, many days and nights in the cigar shop with the earbuds in. What was the most challenging part of your book, writing it? Was it, like you said earlier, taking all those bits and pieces and short story per se, as you were writing all these little things and then starting to put the puzzle together? Or was it trying to get the thing bought? Or what was the most challenging part about writing a book?
Getting the word count. For me, getting the word count, I think where it needed to be sort of like I said, like a commercially viable manuscript, right? So the raw manuscript for Close and Destroy was somewhere in the low 80s, like 81, 82,000 words. I will tell you historically, like when I was on deployment, just writing fiction to sort of kill time and stay sane, I could stick with something for like 15 to 30,000 words and sort of like, oh, well, like I kind of hit a wall. I'll go back and finish it like on my next deployment or whatever. And then I would just catch wind of some other idea or something like that. And then,
I think that's
I'd start again somewhere else.
that kind of falls into the area of like a Ray Bradbury short story, almost 15,000.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there, maybe a little more than his typical, but you're right in that it makes for kind of a short story at 15,000. But
Yeah, and so I mean, none of that stuff's again, even just the cost of paper nowadays, right? Like, there's got to be a certain word count, page count that's viable for a publisher to sink that cost into, and 15,000 words ain't it.
I could see a screenwriter love this because there's enough of a storyline, there's enough stuff going on, but like you said, even with the word count, there's enough that they could ad-lib. This would be a kick-ass movie. I mean, so from what I'm reading, I'm like, man, you've given them enough, and if somebody that like your idol movie director's like, yeah, I'm going to pick this up and go. Will you give me some creative freedom to kind of ad-lib a little bit? This thing would be killer. So how
for the record, the movie rights are still up for grabs to anybody listening who knows somebody who knows somebody. So, just saying, I also think it would be a kick-ass movie, but I'm biased.
I'm biased.
Like, how do you balance what probably would have happened versus what you want to happen?
That's tough. Because a lot of, like I said, I mean, for all those deployments I did as a contractor, there's a lot of sitting on my ass. Like, I'm not gonna puff myself up into something I'm
we
not.
We hear that
right?
pretty regularly, actually. They're like, well, as much as there are glory stories, there's more dudes just sitting
when
around
it hits the
doing
fan,
nothing in
when
the
it
dirt.
hits the fan, it hits the fan, and when it doesn't hit the fan,
yeah, right.
Yeah.
There's a quote out there about something about war is long stretches of boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror. And I wish I could remember who said it, but it's a really good description, right?
Yeah.
So I certainly don't want to write, nobody wants to read a novel where, the first 30 pages are 6 dudes smoking cigarettes on the back of an MRAP, right?
Yeah.
Like talking about girls they dated in high school or whatever. I mean, maybe somebody does want to read that. I don't know. But, you do have to pace that out but the flip side of that is like you do call it, it is a bit of the Hollywood version, right? Where, it's it's a lone hero and he has his own private jet and his own helicopter and 16 guns in the trunk of his like souped up car and all that stuff. And there's nothing. I mean, there's nothing from an entertainment value standpoint like. That works and people love it and there's a reason people love it and I read plenty of that kind of stuff myself too. For me, I wanted something a little more procedural which like if you look at like maybe like the murder mystery genre, like they do, or like even like TV shows, right? They talk about like police procedurals, where like the actual sort of like the process that goes on in an investigation is part of the story.
Dude, I've seen CSI Miami before. I know
Yeah,
how this is
and
done.
so there's just like the lone hero, like the John Wick stuff, right? Like there's also I think there's also a market for. I'd like to think that there's a market for sort of the police procedural style of storytelling, but again, more on that like military intelligence contractor foreign policy side, which I can think of some authors that do it, but you don't see it very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that for me, I kind of tend to lean in that direction because I was immersed in that. And again, like I can tell you the number of times I saw somebody get like a critical piece of intelligence and jump on their private Learjet and fly to another country to like execute a mission about it, like that many.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
Maybe I just wasn't cool enough to see it.
There's a bunch of movies about it, though.
yeah, well,
Yeah, but there's a bunch of movies about it, and it's good. It's good storytelling, and it's fast paced, and it's edge of the seat. And that was something I was worried about. I was worried about sort of losing people, in the procedural side of that. But the truth is, like, kind of that's authentic to my base of knowledge and base of experience, and that was kind of the way I wanted to tell the story. I think that in a lot of, I think sometimes like the support staff, right, don't really get any like airtime or glory time, and some of that's starting to change, right? Like there's some TV shows that I've seen where it's like, wow, like they kind of do show sort of the whole arc of like mission planning and intelligence collection and all that stuff. But again, like it's a little bit few and far between. And that, like I said, kind of folding that in that's just what felt authentic to me.
I do want to ask Tom, because you kind of touched on entertainment value, and the AI made it sound like you have some sort of like unspoken agenda about it, but outside of the entertainment value, what did you hope that people would take from this book?
Oh, that is a good question.
Or I mean, if it was literally just an exercise of entertainment, like that's understandable, but I mean, it seems to have some sort of, is there another message?
I don't know. I'll tell you, I didn't necessarily sit down and start writing with the intent of like, there being necessarily like a lesson in the, like I didn't sit down thinking like, well, I really hope that when people read my work that it touches them in this particular way, or that they walk away with this particular lesson, right? Like admittedly, for better or worse, like that's not necessarily how I went into it, right? Like I said, I've been writing my, almost my whole life in one fashion or another. I enjoy storytelling. I'm an entertainment consumer just as much as I am a content creator. But I wanted to tell a story in my way with my experience. And maybe a little bit of that sort of, Mike, the balance you're talking about is, maybe there's a little bit of educational value in there, right? Like maybe they're showing, maybe something that I do that somebody hasn't seen before is, trying to sort of show a little bit about the, on that procedural side, obviously without tipping the hand too much, but
Of course.
it's like I said, I love the lone hero stuff. I started reading that stuff in high school, and maybe we can dive into some of that stuff later, but I love that stuff as a consumer. But I do also I like seeing stories written by people who understand the procedure, and that's what I wanted to do. So yeah, again, there's not necessarily a profound message buried in there anywhere. But the great thing about, a piece of work, whether it's a TV show or a song or an album or a book, people can take what they want from it, one way or the other. People might form opinions based on the storytelling that the artist or the author never intended. And that person, that audience member may come to strongly dislike the content creator based on an opinion that wasn't necessarily intended. But honestly, that's part of the risk and the reward, right? Of putting a piece of work out there. Again, whether I'm not even just talking about me, whether it's, music or movies or whatever. you know, any kind of entertainment or artwork or anything like that is always sort of subject to interpretation.
Put yourself out there for criticism for sure. I was just gonna wrap up on that, and that I think that that's a really valid answer and a fair answer of like, you know, I didn't set out to like send any specific moral, but it is also valuable to say like, hey, I wrote this as a piece of fiction, but from a place of knowledge and understanding of this type of content. You know, like I couldn't sit down and write the same book because I don't know anything about overseas contract. Like I don't know anything about it. But I might be able to write a book about the history of the Kalashnikov rifle better than Mike. You know, and it's like
You definitely
maybe
could.
there isn't a secret moral there, but I'm writing it from a place of a little bit better knowledge. And that's a good point.
I'm glad you brought that up though, Matt, because I was going to say there are different strokes for different folks. And when it comes into the procedural stuff, that's the glaring thing. But when it comes to authors in general, we're going to put them in two categories. We're going to put them into military or ex-military authors and those authors who haven't served. And how do you think that the veteran community contributes to the genre of, you know, the military fiction compared to those who didn't serve? And then the second part of that is, even if you didn't see the craziest of times, is that writing therapeutic to you?
Ooh, damn.
Okay. All right. Let me chew on that for a second. Okay. So the
So
first part is, how do veterans contribute? How, like, veteran writers, how do they contribute to the genre?
Yeah, like, and I want to lump all of you guys in as in one bowl, no matter how the writing style is. When it comes, we're going to stick to fiction here. We're not going to stick to, you know, books about what they did. We're going to talk about just strictly fiction books. How, other than the minor procedural things, how do you think that the veteran authors contribute to the military fiction world, and how is that better? Because I believe it's better, even though
I think so.
I think this is a loaded question, but how is it better compared to those who haven't served, other than those procedures?
Okay. That was a softball right until the end. Okay. So I think again, like taking sort of some of the procedural stuff for granted, and I've read some veteran stuff where like they weren't super concerned with the procedure, and that's okay. Like that's you know, everybody's writing style, like you said, is different. Some people get lost in the minutia, and like I said, that was even for myself, I felt like that was a risk to dive into some of that stuff as much as I did. Right, you guys are talking about EOTech in the beginning, and like I you know, named some brand names of, you know, when it comes to guns and equipment, the stuff like that. Some of it because like, hey, like, you know, there are people out there that want that level of detail in the
Correct.
storytelling, and for me it was just like, hey, like this is stuff I either did use overseas or wished that I had access to overseas, right? So you know, you do get, I think, even veteran-based storytelling that is not, you know, maybe doesn't lean on the policy or procedure stuff. It's informed in a way that only experience can inform,
Preach.
right? And so
Hell yeah.
maybe the juice there isn't the procedural, but maybe for some veteran authors, it is conveying the reality and the grittiness of emotion, of the experience, and its impact on you know, whatever, the human psyche, sort of telling that story of war as a factor of the human condition. You know, I've seen some really well done veteran-based stuff that touches all that, or you know, telling the story of, for lack of a more refined way to say it, like telling the story of the boys, right?
Yeah.
Or the boys and girls. I mean, that's the reality of
Yeah.
it. And what I mean by that is, if you look at, you know, I'm gonna lean more on the silver screen side here, but like if you look at, like, that to me is the draw of like Band of Brothers. That's the draw of Black Hawk Down, right? Like
Yes.
the action is awesome, right? That you have these epic like set piece battle scenes that are amazingly well done. But at the end of the day, those particular stories, um, the lesson, right? Like to kind of bounce back to Matt's question earlier, I really think the lesson is how much it really is just about the people around you,
I think
and the
I
people
think
who are
that's
you
what it's always
sharing that
about.
experience with.
Yeah, I think that's always what it's about, and I'm glad you touched on that. And it still was a softball. It just you had to kind of take a couple fastballs until you got that change up. But I think that's right because you know to the unknowing, to the uninformed. Oh, hey, we're gonna go hit this possible target at this house tonight. Okay, great. The procedural, is it's got to go up the chain of command to here, to here, to here, to here, to here to get all these approvals and make sure everything's right and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that is entertaining. Some of that is necessary I would think, in writing. But if you put every single, you know, piece of the paper trail together, I mean, you'd be 500 pages deep before you even got to go to the mission. And my God, that would be taxing to read. So I like how, again, I didn't serve, but I like how you put enough military-esque provisions in there for chain of command, but you never lost sight of the end. And so you would go to, this person's thoughts or feelings or what they're about to do or what they're prepping for and all that. And I thought that was really interesting. And it made a lot of sense to me, is that I could see myself feeling that way if I were in that situation or something like that. But whether you saw, the 72-hour gunfight or you never saw a stray bullet fly by, just reflecting on your time, that second part, was it therapeutic to write about this? Like therapeutic, even though it was fiction, to kind of release and kind of let go of something?
Yeah, I mean, I think all writing is therapeutic to one degree or another, right?
Mm.
And I would go so far as to say that that is even beyond the realm of military fiction. Matt, if you wrote that Kalashnikov book, there would be, I would say that there would probably, I'd be willing to bet, a therapeutic release in there, even if that sort of little bit, that little tiny slice of catharsis is like, hey, I want to share this knowledge with the world.
Mm.
And even if 3 people buy this book, like I made a contribution to hopefully somebody's knowledge base about a passion that they have, and that makes the effort greater than myself, right?
And
And
you made a
so,
For
contribution
sure.
to literature.
right.
Yeah. Passing knowledge is
So
powerful.
yeah, absolutely. And for me, it wasn't like there was like one particular thing that I had to get through, and uh that there was just like some singularity, right? Like some moment of release about it. But yeah, absolutely, it's therapeutic, right? Even if it's therapeutic in the way of sorting to get to revisit, one of the things you hear a lot of veterans talk about when they transition out of the military is sort of that loss of camaraderie, right?
Mm.
um, because there's not really very much in the civilian world, where the closeness of that, that fellowship really is mirrored. And so, I mean, some of the therapeutic value, I will tell you, is like for me, like getting to dip back into that world that is surrounded by guys that have that bond, even if like I'm making all those dudes up in my head, right? Um,
Sounds
but again, I
healthy.
mean,
No problem.
right? Yeah, right. Like even if it's just the voices in my head, all sharing knowledge around the campfire. No, but again, like you said, like I think it's inescapable for somebody with a background in working overseas and deploying overseas to put something together like this, and it's obviously you're drawing from previous life experience, so it's
Mm.
maybe it's a trip down memory lane that way, like maybe even like maybe it is a slightly sanitized version of it where you can go back to the good parts and not have to worry about the rough spots, right? Like, I think there's all kinds of therapeutic value for particularly veterans writing fiction, even if they're not trying to tell, they're not trying to write the next great American war novel. I think that there's all kinds of value in it.
I was going to say I agree, and I think it's whether, like I was saying earlier, whether you saw the stray bullet or you saw the 72-hour gunfight, there were guys in your class at the Merchant Academy. There were guys when you transferred into the Army. There are guys that you have met along the way that either know somebody who didn't make it back or they themselves didn't make it back. So you actually, some of those feelings that you're writing about, even if it's, oh yeah, that one guy, John, that I was in the academy with, that I didn't speak too much, but dang, I just heard he didn't make it back. You're able to put some of those feelings into what your characters are feeling, and you're actually being able to dip from a real world experience in that aspect, no matter how close they were to you. And I think that puts some sort of semblance of realism into the book, even though it's fiction.
That is a much shorter,
Spot on.
more succinct version of what I said. So thank you for
Yeah.
paring that down for me.
I wasn't even thinking about that. So my last question on the military involvement and background, and this is not to pick sides. I'm going to make a statement, and then you can either choose to not comment on it, or you can choose to comment as much as you want on it. I think that nonfiction, your story's good enough. Whether you drove a truck to deliver food to Chow Hall every day, and that was your role from the from the airfield or from the shipping ports, or if you saw, action every night. I guess, what's your thoughts on the nonfiction books that are getting a little extravagant? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
The first thing the thing actually that you said that really hit the nail on the head for me is your story is good enough. Like I said, I definitely had a handful of long days and a couple of close calls, but I was a conventional mill guy, right? And then on the contract side, like, it was force protection and security. So like when I went through when I applied for that contract job, and the first time you sort of get together with a group of guys and you start going through like a pre-deployment training workup, there were a dozen of us. And of the dozen, half of the class were Army Special Operations guys. Half of the dozen. And there was some Navy Special Warfare in there. There was, some Marine Corps SOC type guys in there. And then there was me. And I had a couple of years, and I was started out as a butter bar, and I was conventional mill. And that was a super intimidating experience. And that was kind of like oh God, like, what am I doing here? Like, how did they let me get this far when I'm surrounded by like all these dudes that are like so much higher up on the cool guy totem pole than me?
These guys messed up.
Why
They
am I
let me in
the
here.
most uncool guy in the room?
Yeah, which you kind of got to figure out how to handle that, right?
Yeah.
And for me, my experience in that moment was, to sit around at the end of the day with those guys and go, man, like, you guys did all this cool stuff. Like, I did my piece and I'm proud of my piece, but like, basically, like, this is all I did. And I had one of the special operations guys say, hey, look, man, like, you don't have to couch it, right? You don't have to say, well, I only did conventional military. I was only this, right?
You did what was asked of you.
Right. His words to me were like, hey man, you did your piece, I did my piece. Like, that's how it works. Like, it's not that big a deal. And I tell that story to really kind of harp on your point about like whatever your story is, like, your story's good enough.
Yes.
I love that.
And that's part of that really stuck with me for a long time. And when I found myself in situations where I was sort of kind of like you said, Matt, like, by far the uncoolest guy in the room.
So I didn't mean any offense by that, but I'm usually the most uncool guy in the room. So like, I know
He's not lying.
I did what I could to sort of like learn from those guys, from their experiences, and to be better at my whatever, my trade, my craft as a security specialist, as a contractor, kind of however you want to frame that, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, man, like I just want to pull my weight, right? Like here's what I did, here's where I came from, and like I just want to pull my weight. Like how can I help? Um, so I mean that really is my take, I guess. I don't know if this is. I'm trying not to give you a non-answer, but like my I don't know if I'd call it advice, but my response would be to anybody out there who wants to go into the veterans that really are kind of looking at the nonfiction side. And I can think of plenty of guys who would look at that and go, "Oh man, but like I wasn't this, so nobody would read my story or nobody would care about my story." And I'm very much not inclined to agree with that.
I want to touch on that a little bit because I think there are a lot of veterans out there who don't think that their story is important, or, they didn't do anything cool, so it doesn't matter. Like to me, and I'm sure Mike kind of feels the same way. Like I didn't serve, my older brothers served. Um, Hell, even my younger brother, he was in the Navy, and that's again, he's like, "Oh, my story doesn't matter. I never went to war." Like you signed on a dotted line that was a blank check for Uncle Sam, and I respect that no matter what you did.
I want to move into now AI said a little bit of it, and we're going to dip into some of your writings prior to the book, but it probably has some correlation here. I want to talk about advocacy and the firearms community, because you're a shooter. I follow you on Instagram. You find a lot of joy getting out there on the range when you've got the time, and you get out there and you do some things. So how do you see your role as a fiction author in the Second Amendment conversation?
Oh,
Ooh, yeah, ooh. As a fiction author,
Well, but also as and I
yeah,
say that not to knock it down, because I also want to say, how do you see yourself, Tom Marshall, being a fiction author as well? Not saying, oh, he's a fiction author, so he just makes stuff up. Like you actually can run a freaking firearm. I've seen it.
yeah.
You can do it, but being a fiction author and also a connoisseur and consumer of firearms and a passion for them, how do you see your role in the 2A? That's probably a better way to put it.
yeah. I'd like to say as an educator, certainly not primarily through my fiction. Again, if you go back a little further, you talk about some of like the magazine article work, right? And I am still doing some freelance writing, in terms of like articles and firearms reviews and things like that, right? So, on that side, I really, up until Close and Destroy, all of my writing really was, educational, I would say, hopefully, educational content, centered on Second Amendment stuff. And even if it's a firearms review and we're not having like a policy or legal discussion, right? Or educating people about that passion, about that freedom, about that hobby. If you compete, it's a sport, right? If you're any kind of armed professional, whether
Or
that's military, law
preparedness,
enforcement, right?
not even just guns and shooting too. You also have a pretty broad portfolio of gear and preparedness outside of just guns.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I said, I spent a couple of years, running the off-grid brand. So yeah, and you're right. It's not just guns. I'm a bit of a nerd for like backpacks and stuff like that, backpacks and boots. So yeah, so I would say certainly, advocacy and education is probably really where my role is. Trying to translate some of that realism down to, some real world brand and product inclusions on the fiction side. Like, maybe there's a little bit of education there. Again, maybe it's embedded in some of that procedural stuff that we talked about earlier. But yeah, like I said, in terms of what do I think my role is in the 2A community as again, like I guess, content creator, for lack of a better term, in terms of magazine
Educator.
articles and things like that. Yeah, educator and slash advocate.
What's your take as, I guess, as a veteran, as a contractor? What's your take on how veterans are received in gun culture and, I guess, the broader political landscape? So like, I don't know, maybe touch on like VA red flag laws, from a veteran's a veteran's perspective?
I mean, man, that is a ginormous can of worms.
It is a big can of worms. I apologize.
Why'd you open?
No,
Yeah.
that's okay. You know, my first thought on red flag laws is like I understand the intent, but man, is that a slippery slope?
It is. It definitely is.
You know, I think that's not being like a legal and a policy guy. That is probably as much as I am qualified to say. Is I certainly understand why people would find that solution attractive, but it isn't. To me, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, I think like I mean obviously if you're uneducated about the subject as a whole and you think really narrowly about it, you're like, oh yeah, take guns away from people who could potentially be dangerous. But a lot of that comes back to our veterans, and a lot of that information is coming through the VA, where veterans receive the most help. So it's kind of a touchy
VA
subject.
thing. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and take my buy on the VA thing, and the reason why is because I've been very fortunate in frankly not I haven't really needed much in terms of VA services.
I haven't had to deal with them motherfuckers.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
Yeah. Thank God. Good on you, bro.
Yeah, I still got all my fingers and toes, you know, and I'm very fortunate to have, you know, played the game as many times as I did and make it out in the shape that I'm in. So I just, you know, I've just not really needed their services. I've heard all kinds of stories from all ends of the spectrum. I've heard guys tell me that VA services really saved their life and put their life back on track. And of course, I've heard horror stories just like everybody has about the VA. That's just not something that I really personally have any experience with.
Tom, what do you say to someone who might be new to gun ownership? I mean, we get wrapped up in ourselves talking amongst our own echo chambers. I mean, I know that you know about guns. I know that Mike knows about guns. We can have a conversation. But what do you want to say to somebody who's new to gun ownership and is realizing that the Second Amendment is something that they need to help protect and wants to be an advocate or a protector of the rights, but maybe they don't necessarily have a platform like a podcast. Maybe they're not a great author. What do you say to somebody new like that?
Gather up as much education as you can, right? And I'm going to use the term education as opposed to information because, I mean, there's good information, there's bad information, and we've all come across it, right? So do your best. And I understand that a lot of people, they don't know what they don't know, and they don't know where to start. And that's absolutely, I mean, that's a tough spot to be in on any subject, whether it's firearms or anything else, right?
Yeah.
Not knowing, you know, where to start or who to talk to. And I think that's the fastest way that people wind up getting, you know, maybe not the best quality of information. So be thorough. You know, don't accept sole source on anything. Educate yourself as best you can. There's a lot of really good people in this community. There's a lot of really good 2A folks out there that just want to open that door for everybody who's interested. And, you know, try to find some in your local area and be part of the grassroots effort, right? Whether that's, you know, you bringing a friend with you, whether that's you reaching out to your, you know, city, municipal, state advocacy group. You know, most states have some kind of, you know, firearms rights sort of watchdog group. And then there's some really well-known ones at the national level. Whether you make your statement in the, you know, with your ballot or in the polling booth. I mean, all those things are important. You don't have to have a podcast or you know, a channel to broadcast on. That's fine. You know, really, person to person is how those barriers are knocked down between people who aren't sure and people who, you know, want to educate.
We're going to get into a lighter side. It's a fun side. We're actually going to get into some show and tell here. You somehow, in your own way,
I just learned about this.
You willed yourself into a collaboration on this book. You spoke it into existence, sir. How the hell did you say, yep, we're going to have a knife and this is what we're going to do. And I'm going to write all this stuff out and I'm going to speak this thing into existence. Tell me, A, what was your thought process writing this? And then B, did you think it would actually happen? And then C, we got to see this thing and talk about how cool it is.
If by speaking it into existence you mean begged and pleaded someone to collaborate with me.
Hey, ain't no shame in that game, man. It happened. It happened. Your story's good enough.
Fortunately, it was not that bad. You know, I kind of tripped and fell through a friend on a friend of a friend kind of thing into some really great partners. So, you know, there's a scene, I think, you know, the opening scene of the book, the prologue, good guy stabs the bad guy. That's all I'm going to say about that. Go and read it for yourself. The knife that is described or named, really, I don't know if I necessarily quite describe exactly what it is, but the knife that's named in that scene did not exist when that scene was written. And I went through a couple other iterations, you know, of drafts and rewrites, and you know, I'm not a huge, like, I would not call myself a knife nerd. My knowledge base on that side certainly does not extend, you know, to the depth that it does on the firearm side or the preparedness side for sure.
Hey, man.
But I've been carrying a pocket knife since I was, 13, 14 years old, right? And, you know, I've carried defensive fixed blades and, you know, whatever, a knife in your bag or a knife on your kit or whatever, right? It's just kind of like a staple tool.
It's a tool, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, again, I'm not like a knife guru. I don't have like a knife fighting style that I ascribe to or anything, but I kind of had an idea of what I would want in like let's call it a defensive fixed blade, right? Something that could be carried in plain clothes and street clothes, something that was, you know, large enough to get the job done in an emergency, small enough to, you know, small enough to still be concealable.
Yeah,
right?
conceal it.
Again, so this is all sort of built around a scene in the book where the guy's in a fight with somebody. But it was, you know, well, okay, if I was going to, you know, carry something for, you know, whatever, personal protection, self-defense, kind of like what would like I want out of it. And like I said, the knife that's named was, you know, it's in the book, I call it the contingency dagger. And it didn't exist when I wrote it. And after the book actually was published and we're in the final stages of publishing, and I was having a conversation with somebody about something completely unrelated to knives or anything like that, and basically said, hey, if you have this, like, do you have an idea? Like, do you have a cocktail napkin sketch of you know, you know, what this thing might look like? And I didn't have a sketch. I had an idea in my head, but I didn't actually have a sketch. And I sat down.
It's got a stab. It's got a cut. And it's got, yeah, it's a stabby, it's a pointy, it's a
kind of big. It's not too big.
Yeah, that's really where it started. And so again, I wound up getting
sharper than a screwdriver, right? As long as it's sharper than a screwdriver, we're good.
As long as it's sharper than a screwdriver, right?
You know what I mean there.
Yes, I do know what you mean. Yeah. Read the book and you too will know what that means. Wound up getting partnered with the team over at Colonel Blades, and they have been awesome. Like I said, I gave them, I actually didn't have a cocktail napkin sketch, and I had to make one, which I still have folded up and stashed away somewhere. It's terrible. I might as well have drawn it in crayon, but somehow they took what I gave them and came up with a design that frankly I'm super happy with. Like it's right where I you know, wanted it to land in terms of like length and feature set and things like that. And they did a really good job. By the time you guys listening hear this podcast, it will be open for pre-order. We're looking at we're looking at a launch at Blade Show in Atlanta. Like that'll sort of be the formal launch. We're going to open up pre-orders a couple weeks before. Little Easter egg, if you do put in a pre-order, we are going to ship signed copies of the books with all the knives that were pre-ordered. And if you miss the pre-order, I also will be at Blade Show Atlanta signing books and there with the knife. So you guys will have 2 chances to get a knife and a copy of the book that I will sign. If I see in person, I can do it that way, or you'll get one shipped to you.
Oh, you're signing this copy. You're signing this copy.
Yep.
ATL's 3 hours out from you, ain't it, Mike?
Yeah, ATL's 3.5 hours from me. I'm in Nashville. So do you have this thing on you that you can show yet?
You got one of these?
I do. So I think that we're at what I would call like the final pre-production prototype. So the sheath,
I love it already. Coyote, just based on its size, I can already tell that I love this.
So the Coyote Brown sheath, this is done by the guys at TXC. This won't be the standard sheath. We have the standard sheath will be similar. This one is this will be an option if you want it. The guys at TXC are awesome. They make great holsters. I've got a couple of their holsters. So it made perfect sense. So super simple.
Exactly what I imagined it would look like.
Right? Like I don't have like giant like meat mitt hands.
Nope.
So it's a 3-inch blade, AUS 8 steel. We might, for those of you who are like true like knife connoisseurs, we are probably going to look at some like more some different materials in terms of blade material going forward. We will offer it double end, single edge. This one is double edge. That was my preference. There are some places out there where there's legalities with double edge. So we're going to offer it as a single. This one, for those of you that are watching, you may or may not be able to see that it actually has the Windsor Craft logo laser engraved on it.
Lord.
Yeah. So they won't all come like that. You can. It's a pretty utilitarian design for whatever purpose you want it for. G10 scale, super nicely balanced. I wanted a pretty good aggressive texture on it. And so, like I said, these guys did a great job. We're looking at a $99.99 price point. I wanted it to be super accessible. I didn't want it to be like a 1% collector knife. And like I said, we are looking at maybe some of those types of variations, but
more exotic materials and stuff.
Yeah, more exotic materials. Maybe some change. Some changes to the grip scales. But we really wanted this to be attainable. We wanted this to be available to anybody that thinks that they might have a use for it. And again, with a single edge version available, like it, maybe it is, maybe it isn't a self-defense thing. Maybe it's just a super, economically accessible utilitarian knife for you if that design works for you. But for me, it's kind of everything I wanted for the situations where I might carry a knife instead of a gun or in addition to a gun for self-defense. And it'll be available on the Colonel Blades website. And like I said, by the time you guys hear this episode, pre-orders will be open. And if you miss the pre-order, like I said, we'll be at Blade Show Atlanta in June.
I think it's a really cool design, Tom. Are you familiar with like the Finnish Mora knife? Like
yes.
They just have like a utility knife that's a fixed blade, kind of a short fixed blade, and everybody uses one, everybody carries one. You use it for freaking everything. And it's a pocket knife, it's a utility knife, but it's also a weapon. And I like knives that kind of fit that purpose. There's too many knives that are designed for one thing or the other. Like, oh, this is utility. Oh, this is a fighting knife. And it's like, well, this big stupid honking thing, I can't freaking carry it anywhere. And it's terrifying looking. But I'm not a real big knife nerd, but I do really like I do like knives. I just don't fall down the rabbit hole as much as some people, and I think that's a really nice design. So I will be having one, no doubt.
Well, I appreciate it, and if you guys make the trek, hopefully I'll see you guys in Atlanta.
Yeah, dude.
But yeah, it is. I wanted a utilitarian design. Again, in the context of the book, it absolutely was.
It makes perfect sense in the context of the book. It makes perfect sense that's what was drawn, that's what was used, and it definitely more than got the job done.
But like you said, Matt, that's it's not necessarily purpose built for that. And again, we're going to offer double end, single edge, for whatever whatever your needs are. So
I think that's an important. I mean, I'm not a knife nerd, but I have strong opinions about knives. I think that's an important um, feature of a fixed blade. I guess is like it should be utilitarian, but it part of the utility of a knife is also as a weapon, and it doesn't have to be a big honking stupid upside down Bowie knife to be an effective weapon, but it has obviously features of both utility and is also a defensive weapon. So it's a cool design. I really dig it.
thank you, I appreciate it. The design guys at Colonel Blades took my sort of again like my raw cocktail napkin sketch, and there were sort of several revisions of how did we want it to come out, and they did a fantastic job, and they've been great to work with.
Elegant simplicity. There's too much design, especially in knives nowadays. Too many curves, too many serrations, too many things. It's like, give me a point, give me an edge, and keep it pretty simple, and I'm gonna rock with that. So, congrats. I'll be going to. I'll be on that pre-order list.
All right, so Tom, what I want to say is that readers inevitably are going to compare your work, and not just readers, it's just anything in any facet of anything that's done in life. When we compare your work, and I hate saying that, I say it loosely, to the likes of Jack Carr, Rick Prado, Don Bentley, these are all fellow veterans that are writing fiction and trying to add their version of grit and realism. How do you see your work as similar and different?
Well, that's certainly a doozy of a list of names to throw myself in with. Gosh,
The goats.
That's a win right there, dude.
I would not have done that. But since we did, first of all, those guys are all, I mean, they are monuments, of the genre. And I mean, Rick in particular, is nonfiction.
Yeah.
And I am honored to call Rick Prado a friend of mine. I asked him for a cover blurb for Close and Destroy, and not only did he deliver, but he actually gave me a foreword. So if you guys get a copy of Close and Destroy, Rick Prado wrote the foreword for me. And if you don't know who Rick is, that's what Google's for. I met him. I interviewed him for Recoil magazine a few years back. We did a big spread. That was when he was kind of at the height of promoting his book. And like I said, I'm proud to call him a friend for sure. Don Bentley was kind enough to sort of give me a little bit of advice along the way. I kind of knew somebody who put me in touch with him, and that was a pretty brief exchange. But again, thankful that he took any time at all. And Jack Carr is certainly a name that needs no introduction if you read anything in this type of genre. So again, certainly like monumental dudes that we're talking about here. In terms of the similarities, excuse me, I think that it's, I think that pretty much lies on the surface, right? Very much in the same genre.
Military, war, conflict, things are happening.
Right.
You got to make it happen.
Yeah, thematically, right? Like, I think that overlap's going to be, if you've read any of that stuff and you come across my stuff, I think that's going to sort of speak for itself. In terms of differences, one of the things that I really like about fiction, and you could probably say this about any genre, military thriller is not just what I write, it's what I read. I've been reading it, probably since high school. It doesn't matter how many different books by different authors you read, right? Like there's always a unique way to tell a story. Somebody's always gonna, describe a gun going off differently. Somebody is always going to build up a character's resume and backstory differently. I kind of liken this to like firearms training, getting back to some of the stuff we were talking about before. I've been very fortunate in my career to go through a lot of like very professional level firearms training with a lot of different instructors. But I'll be the first to say, like, I'm not above taking anybody's like pistol 101 or carbine 101 course, because you can always learn something new. And
Yeah.
even if you hear something that you've heard before, you're likely going to hear it explained in a different way, that can add flavor, add context. It can add a layer of understanding that you didn't possess before.
Mm.
And I would say, in terms of the differences, readers are going to have to kind of figure that out for themselves. I think they're going to, we talked about creative work sort of being open to interpretation. If you've read anything by Jack or Don or Rick, I hope you give my stuff a chance. Or if you haven't heard of them and maybe you have read or are interested in Close and Destroy, like I would recommend all of them. In no particular order, and I think that I think you can't lose with anybody on that list for sure.
Yeah. And bringing back up Jack, when you read some of his earlier stuff and then you read some of his most recent things, you can see how the transition, and I think it's a growth, whether you're an author or a podcaster or a musician or an artist, whatever it is, you kind of find your niche and you kind of lean into it. And I think he leaned into both action and philosophy in his writing. I guess two-part question is Close and Destroy a Milli Vanilli? Is it a one-hit wonder? Or are you already thinking, I don't want to give any hints away or any teasers, but are you already looking at the next thing or already got inspiration? And either way, whether you have or you haven't, if you were to put pen to paper now and start writing, how do you think you have grown and evolved?
Wow. Okay. That's only two questions. Are we sure?
I mean, that is like
It's a mic question.
the Grail question, but I am known for long-winded, super detailed, in-depth questions that you
peel it
forget
back.
the part two.
Yeah, and I love it, man. I'm here for
I'm
it.
like, we're making onion rings. We're not peeling layers back. We're just stamping circles, man. We're just hitting it.
Oh, we just have layers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. They do have layers. No, I love it, man. I love good sort of like meaty questions I can sink into. Is it a one-hit wonder? Man, that's up to everybody listening to this. I have several next installments fleshed out, and I have, several thousand words of a couple of different things that I've been chipping away on. Whether any of that sees the light of day, sort of will probably remain to be seen, at least for a little while. I certainly hope I get that opportunity. I hope I get the opportunity to sort of grow over the next several books. I hope that there are some people out there that really want to take the journey, for lack of a better term, that the Windsor Craft universe, I guess. But yeah, I personally, you're right. I have a lot more in the tank. I've got, a bunch of stuff I'm toying with and plots and character arcs and all that stuff. But again, time will tell, how much of that, gets the opportunity to see the light of day.
Is it fair to say that I mean this is your first book, this is your first novel? Or is it fair to say that we should expect to see more of that? And not just not to minimize magazine articles, but is this the new Tom Marshall is a novelist?
I hope so. Yeah, like I said, I got plenty in the tank. I've got several more, going down the line sketched out. So yeah, I absolutely, I mean, again, I am still doing magazine work. I love that. I love the educational component. I love the informational component of that. But fiction writing has been a part of my life since long before I penned my first magazine article. So even I would hesitate to call it the new Tom Marshall, but certainly, peeling back another layer for people to see, right? Like this is always something that's kind of been under, under the hat, right? Kind of kept under a bushel basket. It's something I did for myself, and now it's out in the open, and I'm just kind of along for the ride at this point. We'll see how it goes, and but I hope to do more of this. I hope to entertain as much as I have informed in the past, and I hope to be able to bring a bunch of you guys along with me.
I'm going to let you put your Steven Spielberg hat on here. And I'm going to ask you if Close and Destroy was ever adapted, like if somebody bought the rights and said, we're going to make a film or a mini series or a Netflix or whatever it is, what would be your must-haves?
I think bullet point number one would be high quality technical consulting.
Yeah.
Which you're seeing, I'm thankful you're seeing a lot more of, in terms of, everything from weapons manipulation to like gear selection and like weapons and kit being set up properly on actors to like some of the slang and the lingo to like even like how they speak on the radio. In movie scenes, it's really much closer to reality than it would have been, a decade or more ago. So you're seeing a lot more of that than you used to. And there are some old school standouts, right? Like Heat, right? Everybody talks about that, and they had some great consulting on that set. But that trend has continued to evolve and grow, which as a consumer, I'm super thankful for.
Yeah.
But I think for me, that would be number one on the list. Would be rock solid technical consulting.
That's super important. I think the general populace is getting more educated about how firearms and even basic tactics are done, how they're used, how they're manipulated, and there's a lot of criticism in that field now. I mean, there's always been that criticism. All of us can think back to watching, 80s and 90s action films. You're like, come on now, like that 1911 does not have 35 rounds in it. Like we got to reload eventually. So, I think that's a really important fact, and I think that you are right in that is a big trend right now. And people are praising a lot of films that are a little more true to tactics and weapon manipulation, even just as basic as that.
Let's say that let's say the book gets bought. It's going to silver screen. You got a director, you got a casting agent, you're brought on, of course, for consulting. You're trying to do all this stuff. I have an answer of who I want to say, of who I've envisioned right now to start. No. And I'll let you critique me on that, but then I want to hear your answer of who would play Tom. So my answer, and we got to take all of the Marvel studio stuff out of it, because pre-Marvel, pre-running around with a bow and arrow, I really dug. I could see Jeremy Renner playing Tom.
Okay.
If you get rid of the Marvel universe stuff, not that he did bad work, but before that, like he was in a lot of movies that were military or police, and like he played the role well. If you had a say so, and hey, you can, here's who we're working with, but if we had a preference, who do you envision?
Brad Pitt.
Did you say
obviously
Brad Pitt?
Yeah.
Will Ferrell,
duh.
Well, so this question sparks a question that I've gotten several times, which is people will read Close and Destroy, and then they'll come to me and go, "Hey, which one of these guys is you?"
Yeah.
Because it is, and one of the things that I did set out to do is that it isn't. I would call it an ensemble cast, right? Okay. It's not quite like a lone hero story. So I've gotten that a couple times. Like which one of the guys in the
who do you relate to most? I like Pierce.
So My genuine answer when somebody says which one is you, my answer is all of them and none of them,
None of that.
which
Yeah.
is maybe a little bit of a philosophical answer. And it's
Yeah.
not normally what people are looking for, but I mean, I think that's
But
probably
it's
the
probably
reality
true.
of it.
You wrote the
Yeah.
you wrote the book. It's probably a little bit of all of it, right? Like,
Yeah, right. And there are yeah, I mean there's bits and pieces spread out, right? So that would be my genuine answer. But Mike, I know what you're getting at, right? Like who plays the leading role, and
Hmm.
I think Pierce is a good example. Um, I think Jeremy Renner's a great choice, right? I've seen him in, like you said, he's got plenty of other work besides the Marvel stuff,
Yeah.
kind of in this realm that it certainly
Yeah.
makes him capable.
hmm
Um, you know who I really like? Somebody who really has done a lot of this kind of work and who is truly passionate about it is Max Martini.
Ooh.
hold on, I gotta get the Google.
I gotta get the Google.
Gotta
That's
check with the
interesting though.
Googs.
So
I'm ignorant
why
though.
Max?
He's done a bunch of these kind of roles before. Um, you know, he can from some bits and pieces I've seen and heard, you know, the guy can really run a gun. And you know, the thing about this wasn't always the case, but at least when I first started, when I made that shift from active duty military to contracting, and again, this is like not necessarily a universal blanket statement, but um, those guys tend to be a little, you know, I don't know. I hate to put boxes around this, but I think the general perception is I'm going to use words like seasoned, a
Yeah.
little grizzled,
Yeah,
right? Particularly in how those guys are portrayed in movies. And I came across, you know, plenty of dudes, you know, and I've got my fair share of gray hairs for sure.
but they're not a
Um,
20-year-old recruit usually.
uh,
No.
yeah,
Yeah.
for the, you know, for the most part, it's well, because it's, you know, it's typically guys that went and did something else first, whether it
Yeah.
was military or law enforcement, right? They went and did something else first, and then, um, you know, most of the guys I worked with anyway. And again, I don't want to make universal statements, but that was my experience. Was that you know, guys they went and almost exclusively went and did something else first, and then wound up on the contract side. So, yeah, I would want somebody that can speak and carry themselves, and frankly, we're talking about actors, right? Sort of has the appearance that they, you know, they've got that sort of a little bit of gravitas from having been around the block a couple times, and
Mm.
you know, I've seen Max in plenty of stuff, and I think he crushes that. I think another example of that would be Tom Cruise, right? Like, say
Yeah.
what you will about one way or the other, like Tom Cruise can shoot, like Tom Cruise can run a gun, and has plenty of experience. And I actually just went back and watched like the very first Mission Impossible movie, like
That
not
was
even a
like
week
one of
ago.
the first ones were so good. I mean, even is
Yeah,
the newer ones, all his own stunts, all that's still cool. But the first ones, you could tell he was excited about the project and he had a
Mm.
passion for it.
and again, that's a good point, right? Like, does his own stunts and is familiar with that genre of production. Um, you know, and whether it's by design or victim of their own success kind of thing, like some of those guys, like you said, like they become the movie.
Yeah.
And again, with Close and Destroy, I made a conscious effort that it was really sort of an ensemble cast, right? I tried really hard to illustrate different people in different roles performing different functions and illustrating how they all sort of network together to execute warfare kind of almost at the campaign level.
We warmed Tom up, and honestly, like it's been a great talk. It's been a great show without talking about, you know, just the humdrum of guns. Like it's easy as Second Amendment people to just talk about guns and brands and models and things. And so it's been a great talk without all of that. But we are gonna wrap it up with five guns, like we do with all of our guests. So Tom, I warmed you up. What are Mr. Tom Marshall's top five guns? NFA doesn't matter. It's not World War III at the zombie apocalypse. But you do have to cover every shooting discipline that you like to participate in. So, what are the five guns Tom Marshall is taking for the rest of his life?
A good quality AR, and I will leave that open for
Yeah,
interpretation.
you don't
I
have to say
brands
any
I like.
brands. You don't
Yeah,
have to go brand.
Okay, so like a good quality AR, I would probably go. Man, I'd go somewhere between like 12.5 and 14.5 on barrel length. That would be important to me.
It's because you're smart.
Just a good like general purpose. You know,
And
I
you're
can do
rational.
I can do all kinds of stuff with a 12.5 and a 14.5. And again, we talked to the tax stamps don't matter and all that stuff, right?
Correct.
But somewhere in there for sure.
Good choice.
A top-notch, lovingly crafted 1911. My
Can't go
preference
wrong.
is 9mm. Some people say that's blasphemy. I say they're easy to shoot and they're super fun to shoot. But absolutely, a 1911 of sufficient pedigree would be number 2.
2 world wars, man. Back-to-back champs.
Two world wars. Yes, that's right. And a couple more after that, if we're being honest.
Yo,
Oh, yeah.
If you want to
Oh,
come
yeah.
for the title, like, line on up. Like,
Yeah.
we
No
did it
kidding.
twice.
Yep. I am gonna go brand specific on one.
Okay.
That's fine.
A good solid pump action shotgun worked over by Van Comp Systems.
Dude,
Oh.
Van Comp is the shit.
Dude, an 870 worked over by Van Comp with some compensator out there at the end of
Yeah.
the barrel and some polished bolt carrier and stuff. Like, oh Lord.
Yeah, shout out to Cody up there, man. They do great work.
Yes.
I've been fortunate to get behind a couple of their samples, and they are just that's fantastic. Okay, so
I like
we're
that
at
you
3,
cho-
right?
I
Yes,
like that
we
you
are
chose a
three.
scattergun. Scattergun doesn't always make the cut, and I think it's a versatile weapon. I'm a hunter, so I do a little bird stuff. I do a little bit of large game, and like good 12 gauge pump gun. That's a versatile weapon there. So
Yeah.
respect.
So we got the AR-15 or the M4. We've got a 1911 and 9mm, and then we've got the shotgun decked out by Van Comp.
Okay, so I got 2 more. Good quality bolt gun.
Go wrong there. Nope.
Yeah.
What
Let's
brand do you
say
We won't judge you, but is there a ROM preference? Is there a
Say
caliber
again?
preference? We won't
That's what
judge you.
I'm
but is there a caliber?
I'm trying to dial in on that right now, right? Because just saying bolt gun is kind of like that's almost a non-answer.
And nowadays caliber has like, especially when you're talking bolt gun, like it has some consequences. Like somebody,
It
no matter
does,
what caliber
yeah.
you choose, somebody's gonna be like,
Yeah.
"You're full of crap. That's horrible."
Yeah, we're somewhere between a 17 HMR and a 50 BMG.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle there, and no matter what you choose, it's wrong. So
Of course, right? And
choose wisely.
that's the beauty of that market, right?
Choose wisely.
I'm gonna go 6.5 Creedmoor. I
You
think
can't-
it's super versatile, right? Under the right circumstances, you can
Yeah.
push it to a mile or close there too. But it's not too much of a handful, really. Like especially out of a well-built gun, if you've got as long as you're not trying to do like an ultralight, 6.5 really isn't that hard to handle.
No, it's not that
But you can do a lot with it.
bad. Okay.
Yeah. Other than the PRC guys, everyone else is happy with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's tough. I could almost say 6 arc, but I'm not gonna. It's too.
Smart man.
Yeah, I'm gonna stick
Well,
with. I'm gonna
I
stick
mean-
with 6.5. I like the arc. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm gonna
The
stick with
6.5
6.5
is
Creed.
proving it's got more of a resume now, so it's you can't fail.
And
Right.
bolt guns are getting so modular; they're almost as easy as an AR. It's like if it fits in that magazine, we can stuff it through this. We can make a barrel for it and stuff it through this receiver, no problem.
And some of the chassis systems that are out there
Yeah.
now, or I mean, the feature sets you get are just, I mean, it's wild. The sort of the modularity and you can you're at the point now you can kind of yank parts off your AR and put them on your bolt gun and bump them back and forth as needed, right?
Pretty close.
And again,
yeah.
I know that this is not like a survival scenario type question, but I think sometimes I'm a slave to that to slave to utilitarianism, right?
No, it's good. Good.
But yeah,
Good to
and then
keep it
but
versatile.
I am gonna ditch utilitarianism on the last one though.
All right. Something
The last one,
ridiculous.
yep. I'm gonna go with a chopped down RPD. And there's a
Well,
couple people
yeah.
out there listening, some folks that know me that are throwing their heads back laughing right now. Um, some of the stuff that I talking about stuff that I read like when I was younger and growing up.
Yeah.
I read a lot of autobiographies in high school, biographies and autobiographies of guys that were in Vietnam, right? All the like the LERPs and like Mac v SOG guys and stuff like that. Uh, and the SOG guys in particular kind of really ran wild in terms of what kind of kit they were allowed to use and things like that. And they were taking like RPD belt feds and chopping them down to like 12.5.
Holy
So you
Lord.
got a 12.5 belt fed with a 75 round drum, I think is what is
Woo!
standard for those things.
Oh,
And
that's nasty.
so you could, man, with a handy belt fed, you can, if the first four guns I mentioned don't get the job done,
And,
a chop
and
down belt fed isn't a bad
a
way to go.
chop down a chop down RPD will take care of the rest.
Hell yeah, we're gonna stand on this hill and we're gonna hold it till we can't hold it. That's just what it's gonna be.
I wanna tip my hat to RPD because another one of the friends of the channel, Clay Owens, Clayco47, he is in love with RPDs. He loves com block guns just in general, but RPD usually people who are nerds about machine guns and light machine guns would be willing to admit that, like, I don't know, RPD, MG42, like they're kind of in the they're up there in the top 3, top 5 of like best light machine guns ever fielded on the face of this planet. So yeah,
I can go there.
respect to the RPD for sure. Good choice.
It gets overshadowed by the PKM I think sometimes for good reason. But in terms of a light machine gun, like a squad level,
And it doesn't
LMG or
take 2
SAW
or 3
type.
guys to run it. Like one guy can run that gun. Like that's a lot of firepower.
Yeah.
A lot of firepower coming out of one man. So yeah,
So
respect on the
that's the
RPD.
hill I'm going to die on. My last gun is going to be a chop down RPD.
Respect.
Man, you cannot go wrong with that. Well, Tom, we appreciate you coming on, but before we get out of here, we typically tell people, hey, man, tell everyone where they can find you, but yours is going to be a two-parter. Tell everyone where they can find you, and then also tell everyone you're going to miss somebody because you always will because you're put on the spot, but tell everyone where, if they're looking to find Close and Destroy, tell everyone where they can find it.
Okay. Yeah. Easy. For me, Instagram is honestly the best place to find me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do a ton of social media, but Instagram is kind of where that's where my sort of bread and butter is. You can go to @tom.marshall, 2 L's, .author. And I recently started up a second account for kind of in line with releasing and launching the book. And it's just @WindsorCraft, all one word. WindsorKraft. If you do get the book, that'll make a little more sense to you. But yeah, tom.marshall.author is going to be the fastest place to get a hold of me. And then in terms of the book, Amazon.
And you said Windsor.craft or Windsor?
Yeah, just all one word, just WindsorCraft.
All right, because I'm following now.
Yep.
All right, and then about the book.
Yes. 2 places to get the book. Amazon is, for most people, probably going to be the easiest. The other place you can get it is actually the Gun Digest e-store. So Gun Digest magazine is, again, it's one of the publishers I used to work for, puts out Gun Digest magazine along with a couple others. And that's actually the parent publishers who published Close and Destroy. So you can find it in the Gun Digest e-store. Just go to gundigest.com and you can probably get to the e-store from there. But again, Amazon.com, if you could just go in the search bar and just Tom Marshall, Close and Destroy, or Close and Destroy Tom Marshall. Not that I've looked it up 57 times in the last week.
That's how I found
just
it.
to check and make sure it works. It's available paperback and ebook right now. Well, okay, at the time we're recording, it's paperback and ebook. By the time you guys are able to listen to this, audiobook will also be out. I actually, for better or worse, I read the book myself, so the audiobook is me
Awesome.
narrating the book.
Hell yeah.
So that is kind of as we're talking about this right this second, is sort of going through Amazon's sort of final whatever approval process and upload process. Hopefully by the time the audience hears this, you'll be able to get audiobook as well, but it is coming. So
Awesome.
yeah, so not only did I write it, but I read it too. I figured we might as well go for the hat trick, I guess.
Might as well.
I love that. I love that. Well, guys, if you have stuck around this long, we want to thank you for listening. And our mission wouldn't be complete if we didn't drop some 2A advocacy on you. And we're not going to get political. We're not going to speak legalese. We're going to tell you how you can do things the easiest way possible. And that is just take someone shooting that hasn't been shooting before.
Preach.
And let's not do the TikTok and Instagram stuff that we all watch and laugh at in the privacy of our own homes. But let's not outfit the new shooter with the highest caliber, hardest kicking gun you've got to start.
Man, I hate that.
While I hate it,
It's
I
fun to
also
watch.
laugh at it, and it's not cool. But I love fails because I fail a lot.
Yeah.
But let's bring them out and let's start them on something light and let's start them out with something that can build confidence. The key to this is we want people to have fun. 95% of what we do in the firearms industry is shoot for the camaraderie and shoot for the fun of it. We all hope and pray we don't have to use that other 5% to defend ourselves or our loved ones. But we do want to be prepared in case we have to. So I challenge you, if someone you know hasn't ever been out shooting before, take them out, show them a good time, be a good, upstanding advocate for the 2A and show them the right way and make sure they come back. So on behalf of myself and Matt, go get the Tom Marshall book, Gun Digest, eShop, go to Amazon, go check it out. And if you're cool enough, you'll catch it and you can have Tom read it to you. So we'll catch you next time, and thanks for watching.